Welcome to the Apex Sunday podcast, hosted by myself, Robert Ross, and John Dowsett. And before the season resumes in Silverstone, John and I thought we'd look at some key elements of the half season that we've witnessed so far. And John, we're going to start with qualifying. So let's take a look at the pole positions for qualifying by bike and by rider. So we can see that Ducati, the 2024 version, has 6 poles, 67% of all the poles. Martin with 4, Pecco with 1, and Neo with 1. Then we have Aprilia with 22% of the poles. That's just 2 poles. We've got Maverick and Aleix with 1 each. And then we have Mark with 1 pole on the 2023 Ducati at 11%. So if we add the 2 Ducatis together, even though they're slightly different years, we're close to 80% of the pole positions going to Ducati riders.
And I don't think that you can add the 2023 Ducati. I think that's just, that was early on in the season, wasn't it? It wasn't.
No, that was at Jerez. So it was sort of a few races in.
Yeah, that's kind of the early part of the season.
And, but still, no KTMs, obviously no Yamahas, no Hondas. Anything else about pole positions? Ducati dominated and Martin dominated, which is no surprise. He's often the fastest rider over a single lap, isn't he?
Yes. It's kind of sad, but yes. Yeah. It's sad that it's all Ducati pretty much.
All right, so let's look at the sprint podiums, just the podiums, not through all the entire results. We just want to see who's finished in the top 3. So to begin with, we'll look at Martin, who has, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sprint podiums, by far the most sprint podiums. And again, he's often the fastest rider over a single lap, and a sprint is half the race, so you don't have to manage tires as much. You can go more out. So I think Martin naturally has an advantage in the sprint, and he's pretty much making the most of it, isn't he?
Absolutely.
Yeah, good results. Next to that, we look at Pecco. And Pecco in the sprint, he has 2 victories and 1 third place, but that's only 3 podium finishes compared to 7 from Martin. Quite a surprising contrast. Kind of known. It's not too much to surprise. Pecco has a better reputation for races, but this lays it out quite barely, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So we'll stick to the winners. So next we have Vinales and Aleix, right? So Vinales won 2 sprints and he finished 3rd in a couple of races. We see that Aleix finished 3rd in Qatar and he won the Catalunya sprint race. So far, all Aprilias and Ducatis at the top, and almost all Aprilias and Ducatis in 3rd place. Next, we have Mark with a series of 5 second places on the 2023 Ducati. Consistency from Mark. After that, we have the rookie Pedro Acosta on the KTM with Tech 3. He's got 3 podium finishes, so he's shading the other riders at this point in the sprints. And then we have the last 3 riders to be on the podium. We have Binder in 2nd on the first race. We have the Danny Pedrosa, the test rider, former great rider, multiple champion, not in MotoGP, unfortunately. He's sort of like the Sterling Moss of MotoGP. Lots of victories, but never a championship. He's now the test rider for KTM. He used to ride for Honda. He got that 3rd place in Spain. And of course, Miguel just finished 2nd in Germany. My thoughts on the sprint are basically dominated by Martin. Aprilia's did pretty well. KTM's not so much. Mark's pretty much the only 2023 Ducati doing well in the sprints.
Where's Yamaha?
No podiums for Yamaha.
Where's Honda?
No podiums for Yamaha or Honda. Nothing. We'll look at them soon. Yeah. Any more thoughts about the sprint podiums?
It kind of screams that it's machinery, doesn't it?
And some riders too. Martin, Pecco, and Mark being the most consistent, and they're the top 3 riders, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So let's look at the race podiums. Here the narrative changes. We've got Pecco with 5, 6, 7 podium finishes and a lot of victories.
Yes.
Only 1/3 place and the rest are victories. Pecco doing very well. So let's take a look at Martin. Still fairly good, but only 2 victories compared to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for Pecco. Some second places and some thirds. We see that narrative that we discussed a little bit earlier in other podcasts where Martin probably needs a little bit more tire management capability or
Racecraft.
decision making. A little bit more racecraft, yeah. But he's getting closer and closer. Pretty good results, I would say. And he's second in the championship now, just 10 points behind. Next up, we have Maverick. He won in USA, the only Aprilia win for the entire season in the races. Next, the non-winners, we have Mark with only 3 podium finishes in the races, a couple of seconds and a third. So a bit of a surprise. Obviously, we're not covering all the points beneath the podium. So we'll get into points later. But I was a bit surprised by that. Then we've got Enea. He's got 4 podium finishes. Again, everyone expected better from him. Terrible year last year, lots of injuries. Still adapting to the 2024 bike, but at least he's been on the podium. Again, we've got Acosta, the best rookie, the only rookie really, but he's showing up the other KTM riders.
Pretty impressive.
And then we have the finals. Again, Binder second at Qatar. We've got Bezecchi only showing up on the podium in Spain. And we've got Alex who showed up in Germany. Interesting, again, dominated by Ducati riders, particularly Pecco, Martin, and Mark, and Enea. I mean, pretty much it, right? With Aprilia,
yes.
with Vinales, and the rookie doing pretty well. For podiums, the story is pretty clear to me.
Yes.
And
Very
I think
clear.
It tells a story about Pecco more than anything, that he's 10 points ahead now, and I think Martin will challenge him, but hopefully it goes down to the last race because this is a very competitive championship.
Do you think it can continue this way? Or do you think it's just the spread is just going to get broader with the development of the bikes? Because the 2023 bikes are frozen.
Yeah, I think that the Martin Pecco battle will continue pretty much similar to this. Mm-hmm. I think Mark has already said his objective now is to stay ahead of Enea and finish third. I think he's 56 points behind, something like that. So it's going to be very difficult for him. He'll try his best, obviously, as will Enea. But I think the narrative in terms of the top 3, it's between Pecco and Martin, and then the third is between Mark and Enea. Beyond that, who falls after that, we'll see. I usually don't care too much, but we'll see. Any more thoughts on the race podiums?
It's shocking looking at this graphic, isn't it? I mean, it's not. It's so clear as to performance. Yes. and who is quick, but also, as you say, managing tires. Clearly, it's racecraft.
Yes,
because Martin has managed to dump it in the race more than once.
Sure, but still, really good racecraft overall. Gets these good results, doesn't it?
Yes.
All right. So next up, sprint podiums by bike. If we look at the Ducati 2024, 10 podiums, 37%. Aprilia again, 7 podiums, 27. The 2023 Ducati, 5 podiums, 18%. And KTM equaling the 2023 Ducati with 5 podiums at 18%. The story there again is similar to before, where KTM is not even really competing against last year's Ducati. So they need to up their game. And I think Aprilia do as well. Getting these new riders for Aprilia and KTM is essential, but the equipment will have to follow. And it's going to be very interesting to see how well it goes next season with these new riders in these bikes. We've got Martin with the most podiums, and with the least, we've got Petroza, which is no surprise. He was just a one-off. We've got Binder and Miguel with one, and then the rest with multiples. So, any thoughts about this before we move on to the race podiums by bike?
No, I don't think so. I find it interesting that you don't mention a couple of the manufacturers and what's the chance that they're going to come on strong in the second half and do some work in the break and come back and see Yamaha off the front.
So moving on from the sprint podiums on the bike, let's move on to the race podiums by bike and rider. So we've got the Ducati 2024 at 17 podiums, 63%. Ducati 2023, 6 podiums, 22%. Then we've got KTM with 3 podiums at 11%, and Aprilia with only 1 podium. The victory from Vinales with 4%. 7 victories for Pecco, 7 podiums for Pecco, 6 for Martin, and 4 for Enea. That's why they're dominating. And then the 2023, we've got 4 for Mark, and then 1 each for Bez and Alex. KTM, we've got 2 for the rookie and 1 for Binder. And Aprilia, as I mentioned, the Vinales win. Again, was the story here? Ducati, consistency, racecraft. We see the results. Any thoughts?
Well, you brought something up in an offline conversation we had, which is that Ducati clearly have a great bike on pretty much any
every
track,
circuit. Yeah,
which is not the case for the other manufacturers. Kind of interesting. Yeah. And this definitely illustrates it.
It does.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's move on to the sprint victories or wins by bike, and that's from 9 possible victories so far, half season. And we've only got 2 manufacturers here. We've got Ducati with 6 wins at 66%, and Aprilia at 3 wins with 33%. Now I know that adds up to 99, but rounding errors and all that kind of stuff. 4 sprint wins for Martin, 2 for Pecco. Again, only 2 for Pecco, a bit shocking, but we'll see it's different in the races. Then 2 wins for Aleix, 1 for Aleix and 2 for Vinales. And again, I think this tells a story about, even on a very fast half distance race, Ducati is way ahead of everyone else, and apparently Aprilia in the sprints. Any thoughts about this, or same story basically?
It also elevates those riders for me that are on the Aprilia, that if they're able to do that,
right?
And just how hard they must have to struggle to be up there. But Ducati is being so dominant.
And with Aleix going to Honda, hopefully that helps Honda's development next season.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's look at race wins by bike and rider. And again, Ducati, no surprise at the front with 8 wins from 9. So we're at 88%, 6 for Pecco, 2 for Martin. And then we have 1 victory for Vinales. For Aprilia, 12%. It's the same manufacturers, but even more in favor of Ducati, isn't it?
It is.
That's why those 2 are at the top of the championship. Okay, so let's talk about points next. And this is the entire points, not just podiums or wins. Sprint points by bike and rider. Now, how we've done this is from 306 available points if they've gotten positions 1 to 4 every race. So it's sort of like, what are the maximum amount of points we could score? And of course, for Yamaha only having 2 bikes instead of 4, the points are halved, or not halved, but are slightly different, 189 instead of 306. Again, we see here, in terms of points, pretty much the same story. We've got Ducati in the lead at 175, Aprilia at 94, Ducati 57%, Aprilia 31. Then we've got Ducati 2023 at 82 points, 27% in terms of maximum points they could have scored. And then KTM at 80 points to 26% of scored maximum points. So 77 points for Martin in the sprint to 45 from Pecco is quite a contrast. And 58 sprint points from Mark. He's got more points than Pecco in the sprint. That surprised me quite a lot. And so does Vinales in the sprint more than Pecco. So the narrative for a while now has been Pecco's weaker on the sprint and stronger in the race. And
yes,
this shows it, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Also, if you look at the Ducati 2023 numbers, look how far ahead Mark is from the rest of them. That's quite a difference, isn't it?
Well, more than the rest combined, right?
Yeah. And again, with KTM, Pedro Acosta, 38 points, very, very much ahead of the rest of the KTM riders who are very experienced. So great story about the sprints and how many points and what these riders and manufacturers are doing. Well, let's move on to Yamaha and Honda first before we go on to the race points. To no one's surprise, 8 points for Yamaha, 4%, 1 point for Joan Mir in the sprint, 0.32%. This is really, really, really quite bad, isn't it?
It's embarrassing.
They have a long, long way to go. Yeah.
And two companies with a very, very rich heritage of winning races.
Yes. Honda's the winningest MotoGP manufacturer, and I believe Yamaha's pretty much second or not far behind. And the Japanese have dominated MotoGP history for the most part. So
yes,
it's incredible to see these differences.
A lot of embarrassment going on in Japan. A lot of yelling.
Yes, our friend Charlie recently came back from Japan, and he got the opportunity to go on to the Suzuka circuit. And they have a little go-kart.
Nice.
Yeah, they have a go-kart circuit there too. And his son went on it, and he drove the wrong way initially or something. And so Chuck said they got a lot of good Japanese movie style yelling during that session. So that could be going on here at Yamaha and Honda.
Yeah.
So let's look at the race points by bike and see if the narrative is similar to what we've seen. So again, we've got Ducati at 469 points, scoring 70% of the possible points they could have done. Ducati 2023 move ahead of Aprilia just like they did in the sprints for 308 points or 46%. Aprilia drops down quite a lot, 210 points at 32%. This is compared to the Ducatis. And then the KTM's even further back, 195 points, 29%. Look at the scores, 177 points for Pecco. So he's way up compared to what he does in the sprints. And the other than Morbidelli, the Ducati 2024 riders are scoring quite a lot of points. And in the race for the 2023, Mark is ahead, of course, but Digia and Alex quite a lot. Even Bez has had a hard time, 52 points. So it surprised me a little bit to see that. And the rest relatively even, at least the first two. So interesting story there. Any thoughts on these?
Closer than I thought. Closer than I thought. And it's got to be embarrassing for all the non-Ducati teams to have the 2023 beating their 2024 bikes.
It's also interesting.
A lot.
It does. And it's also, I like to contrast the sprint and the race because sprints are relatively new to MotoGP. This is only the second year. So before that, it would have always just been races. And so adding the sprint for every race weekend adds quite an interesting dimension to the championship in the fact that the strengths that some have in the sprint, the strengths that some have in the podium all come together and we get a champion at the end. But the race has more weight than the sprint. So
but it's still a lot of points in the sprint.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm happy that they're doing both. Good to see. Now let's see what the Honda and Yamahas are doing. And they're actually together closer to each other than I thought. 44 points for Yamaha for 10% and 35 points for Honda for 5% of the maximum points they could have scored. So 36 for Fabio, 8 for Rins. Rins is coming off an injury in his first time on a Yamaha, so he's still adapting. And the Hondas, we see Mir and Zarco at 12 points each, Taka at 10, and then Marini scored 1 point recently. Honda is really, really suffering, and so is Yamaha. So Pramac taking up Yamaha next season. Should be interesting to see what happens there. And Aleix can't do too much development for next year's bike. And we'll see. Honda's saying by September they expect some big step, but they need it desperately, don't they?
Oh, unbelievable. It's sad. It's sad. And you know what? This comes back to you talking about watching when you first started watching MotoGP and just the plethora of passes, just constantly back and forth and back and forth. It's not going to happen when you've got guys off the back like this. I mean, they have to be tighter. And that's one of the joys. It's, watching all of these passes and the talent that it takes. And quite frankly, the guts and the bravery that it takes to do it, because I'll do all kinds of crazy things. I mean, but racing on a motorcycle like that, and diving in on the inside, knowing that that you've got like half a degree or a degree of lean before you lose your front end.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think Fabio's doing really well on that old Yamaha, the Yamaha. It's just because he's a rider that deserves, in terms of his past results and his ability, he deserves to be up there with Mark, with Pecco, with Martin, with Enea, and he's just not because of the bike. And Mir too, he's a Moto 3 champion. He's a MotoGP champion with Suzuki. And he's frankly saying it's the most miserable time of his career, and he thought about quitting and worried about injuries. And, the Honda is a bone breaker too. So they have a really tough time bringing them back. But I guess my chief question to you is, how do you feel about rider driver developing and the engineers developing? I never quite understood that line. And can a rider and a driver contribute valuable feedback? We're told that they can, but I still think the engineers, I still think percentage wise, and they still need the engineers to do the key work. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
It's both. And if the engineers don't have the feedback from the riders, they can't do it. Right. It's as simple as that. And, we had that discussion about, how Ducati is a nice all-around bike that does it all well everywhere.
Yes.
And all bikes have to do that. It's the same as car racing, where, some teams are great in the high speed corners, some are good in the slow speed corners, and they can't do both. And you have to do both. And it's better to be marginalized ever so slightly to be able to do both.
Right.
But if you aren't getting feedback from the rider or the driver, I don't think there's enough telemetry that can. I mean, you can look at the telemetry and you can see that Marc Marquez is entering corner 3 and getting on the throttle just a titch later than Martin, as an example.
Sure.
But why is that? Why is that?
Yeah.
And unless you have the rider to be able to say, it's the fastest way for me to get onto the straight. Yeah, I'm a little bit slower, but that's the limit of the bike. Maybe if we tighten up the suspension in the rear, maybe if we have more downforce here or there, and it's twitchy on turn-in. That was the big thing that amazed me, was the difference in turn-in on these bikes. And some are twitchy as hell and some aren't.
Yeah.
How can
And
you
it's
have confidence
interesting.
if you're turning in and it's twitchy?
Yeah. It's interesting also that, there's some bikes that are good for certain circuits. And definitely racers, both two-wheel and four-wheel, prefer certain circuits. For instance, Germany is a Marquez circuit because it's a lot of left corners. But there are riders and drivers who are good at every circuit. They still have their preferences, of course. So when you combine riders and equipment that is good on every circuit, it's a very tough challenge for the other bikes and riders to defeat. So is this a case of the next 2 years is relatively the same story with slight differences, maybe Aprilia and KTM getting better? But 2027, when the new rules come in, that's when Honda and Yamaha, and maybe we'll see a big mix up then. We'll find out, won't we?
What's the cost cap?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure there is a cost cap.
Right. So, and the embarrassment of Yamaha and Honda, who's to say that they can't just throw a whole whack of money and come up with a competitive machine? And I don't know. With very few exceptions, I can look at these riders and say they're all incredibly capable riders. And if you have the right race coach with the young guys, there's no reason they couldn't be off the front if they were on the 2024 Ducati.
Right. Right.
But that's just how I feel. I mean, I know that from the racing that I did, there was always one or two weapons on the track that didn't belong there. But you could feel confident racing with pretty much anybody else. Everybody has roughly the same skills.
Right.
So machines and coaching are the two big things. If you aren't confident in your machine, you're going to be off the back. That's all there is to it. And then that comes back to the engineer making the bike handle properly or getting the power down. And those are two things. So who's to say that somebody else can't come in and just throw down a whole pile of money because it's so embarrassing for the Japanese companies?
Right. And in terms of racecraft, having riders like Enea and Mark and Pecco who can manage their tires and manage an entire race consistently. What was, when you were club racing, is it totally different? Or tires different than that? Did you have to manage them much? Or
Yes.
You did? Okay.
Yes.
And are they a big budget item? Like, did you get new tires every race or what?
They are, it depends on the series. Really depends on the series. I mean, if you're racing GT1, then yeah, you're going to have new tires every race. I didn't race GT1. But it's the same. You overheat them and it's like instantly, it's like you're driving in the rain, and it just goes that quickly. Next thing you know, you turn in at the next corner and you've overheated your tires because you've been dicing with somebody, and you go to turn in and the car won't turn in, and then you have to do something extreme to rotate the car. It's tires. And then you're screwed because then you have to back out enough to cool down your tires. With these guys, they're on the edge, and I believe it's a completely different thing altogether, in that they're just toasting their tires, and they get to the point where they can't cool them back down again. They're gone. They've used them up, and that's a very, very different aspect. And
I think
so, yeah.
Well, I think that's what people kind of miss out on, is there are so many cumulative factors. Your tires slightly going down, the amount of effect that has on your lap and the way you ride or drive the entire lap is quite astounding, isn't it? You can't just go a little slower at this point. You got to sort of adjust for the entire lap.
Yes.
So the best riders and drivers, I think, they have a vision for the entire race, not just the first lap, not just the last lap, the entire race. And this is why the top riders and drivers are always at the top, consistently. All of them have very similar skill level, perhaps. I mean, some are definitely better than others, but I think the massive difference is in understanding the entire race, understanding how to manipulate the equipment you're using to get the maximum out of it every race you can. And you're pushing, it's just, I admire the ability and the racecraft. And that's why I like racing, is watching that kind of thing. So
I think there's more. I think there's more in MotoGP than there is in Formula One, and the pinnacle of
currently, yeah,
car racing. No, always.
always.
I think yes. And if you watch the style of the riders, I'm finally figuring it out. I mean, I've only been watching it for a couple of years, but I'm finally figuring it out. And I used to ride motorcycles, so I've got a little bit of. I didn't race them, but got a little bit of a feel for it. And you
Yep.
can be very, very aggressive on throwing it into a corner, or you can be smooth and still be aggressive.
Yeah.
And but you can really toss those bikes around. When you really toss the bikes around, what's it doing to the compound? And if you're smooth, you're going to be using up a whole lot less of your tires. And I'm starting to see who the smooth guys are, and they're out there.
That's what's, again, back to Mark and Villeneuve. That's the thing that's fascinating about them, is that they can use their tires up, but still drive and ride to a level that the others can't on very, very worn drivers. Like Gilles was like that, wasn't he?
Yes.
Like he was a master of sliding. And they say that Mark, his dedication to training on dirt tracks, and they all do it now. He said, that's why I'm so good at sliding the bike around. And Pedrosa said that watching Mark now on the Ducati, he said he has a problem coming out of corners because there's so much grip on the tire that it grips rather than slides, and he's used to sliding it. So I do find the different styles of the riders fascinating. I understand different styles in cars a little bit more, well, a lot more than I understand different styles in bikes. They talk about the riding style all the time, but in cars, I understand, people who can't like prefer a loose back end or almost an understeering front end. Like there's certain things that people refer. I remember when we were doing karting occasionally, and I got on a cart that I hated. About halfway through that little race, I figured out how to ride it, and I got a little bit better, but I never wanted to ride it again.
Right.
So I do find it fascinating, the differences, and with all these riders changing teams and so forth, there's quite a lot. It's not just get on the bike and go fast. There's a lot of things to do to be successful and score points and win championships and races.
There's also the variables, and the variables are huge. I mean, you're going to drive at the limit. Your tires are going to degrade. The wind is going to change, and
the track changes too, right? The circuit changes.
The track changes as well, and you have to flow with all of that and still stay at, travel at a great rate of speed that would put most people in the hospital from vomiting.
Yeah, and the focus too. That's what, when I've watched, you said F1 had gotten a little bit better recently, and it has. So I watched the last couple of races, and the only complaint I have is, and kind of weird admiration, is how can these guys scream and whine so much while they're doing this at the same time? It's like they're riding on the street and screaming at some guy who cut them off or something. It's just incredible. But anyways,
you have to stay calm. You have to stay calm. That's all there is to it. And I think a lot of the theatrics that you're hearing in Formula One are just that. They're theatrics. Trying to get a penalty to their competitor.
Right.
It's getting a little bit silly that way.
I can say though that trying sim racing seriously without any aids and proper sim software, I'm not a guy who can go fast to find the limit and go back to it. There's no way. I'm not like that at all. And it's almost like the fast part is the last thing you have to think about. You have to think about where to brake, how to accelerate, and then you got to put that all together, and then you find the speed. it's just quite fascinating to me. I have much more appreciation for riders and drivers than I had playing, Simcade games. So
right.
I'm very, very, very interested to see how the rest of the season turns out. We've looked at it from half season. Basically, there's 11 races, but they're taking a break at this point. We've seen the story so far. I pretty much think it's going to be the same, but we'll see. Anyways, thanks, John, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.